In this video, we are going to be talking about Civil 3D sites. Now, what are sites? To put it in easy terms, sites are a collection of objects. Think of 3 or 4 different buckets, and whatever is in the specific bucket with another object, those are going to interact with each other. So if we have 5 or 6 lines in one bucket, those lines, they see each other, they talk to each other, they interact with each other. If they cross each other, they're going to pick up each other's elevation information. Now, we have 4 or 5 lines in bucket 1. Say we have 4 or 5 lines in bucket 2. If things are in separate buckets or separate sites, they don't see each other. They don't talk to each other. For all intents and purposes, they don't know that each other exists. So stuff in bucket 1, we'll just call this bucket 1, site 1, will not interact with stuff in site 2. Now, how do sites work? Well, when we're setting up grading, objects, feature lines, even parcels, we need to specify a site for them to reside on. Now, certain things have to be on sites with each other to interact. So if you have a feature line and you want to create a grading object off that site, those two need to be on the same site. Otherwise, they won't see each other. Now, if we have 2 feature lines crossing each other, we're going to create 2 separate sites. So to quickly show you sites and what happens if you have 2 feature lines on the same site crossing each other at different elevations, what happens. So I'm going to quickly create a new site. I'm going to call this site 1. And nothing in the dialog box needs to be filled out. Just name your sites descriptively. So if you're designing a pond floor, name it pond floor. Or if you're designing a berm, name it pond berm. Name your site what is actually on that site. It's going to keep you sane when you're trying to figure out things in your drawing. So I'm going to click OK. And if I expand my sites drop down, we notice there's a site 1. We can expand it a little bit farther. Let me make this bigger here. And what can actually go on sites? Well, we can put alignments on sites, but we never do that. There's its own little alignments heading here. Something new for 2017 here is a siteless feature line. But all our feature lines we'll be putting on sites to keep them consistent. Feature lines, which we're going to be using right now, grading groups as well, and parcels can go on sites. So I'm going to take these 2, and they're just quick polylines right now. I'm going to just create quick feature lines from objects. I'm going to place them both on site 1. We'll leave them as red. Automatic layer C, feet line, site 1. And I'm going to erase existing entities, and I'll assign elevations later. So we'll click OK. And now if I bring up my properties menu, we now see these are feature lines. So I'll just dock that there. Make it a little bit smaller. So both of these are now feature lines. They both have an elevation of 1. So to confirm that, you can select your feature line. We can right-click Elevation Editor. Actually, they have an elevation of 0. I don't know why Properties is telling me. Maybe it's under a different heading here. Oh yeah, maximum elevation. This is how many elevation points. So max elevation of 0, both of them are 0. Now inside this dialog box here, the elevation editor, these are just 2-point polylines. So I've drawn a polyline from here to here. But what's happening in the middle where they cross? Well, these are where they intersect with each other and see each other. So now let's say I take this one feature line and I want it at an elevation of 150. So I've just changed the 2 points, 3 points to 150. Now let's select this other feature line and go into the elevation editor. Well, now here we see the right side and the left side are elevation 0. The center point is elevation 150. Well, that's not good at all, so let's change these to 200. Not 2,000, 200. Let's go back to this feature line and see what happened. This center point has now picked up that elevation. So these two feature lines being on the same site means they talk to each other. Well, let's create a quick surface, and I'm going to name it Site 1, and just ignore the layer here. And leave it on, actually we're going to make it a 25 meter interval so things work a little bit faster. And I'm going to select these two feature lines, and I'm going to add them to my surface, Site 1. Just accepting all the defaults. So I'm going to rebuild this and see if it actually does what I think it's going to do. So from here to here, it's taking 200, back down to 150. But this is technically on this north-south feature line. Let's change this back to 150. Set this to rebuild automatic. So as you can see, these two feature lines are talking to each other. They're causing issues. We'll never have two feature lines crossing each other at different elevations on the same site. That is where the multiple sites come into. Now, you can have as many sites as you want. Have 20, 30, 40 sites, as long as it keeps your drawing clear and clean. Now, this is probably the #1 reason why Civil 3D crashes, is having crossing objects, different elevations on the same site. If we were to attach grading to this, I'm not even sure what we would do, but we can actually try. Let's just quickly grade to distance. We'll do 3:1. We're going to have to make a grading group. I'm going to name it the same as my site. So I'm going to attempt to grade from, we'll go this feature line. We'll go on this side, apply to entire length, sure. Distance 10 meters minus 3. And actually we probably won't even be able to see that since this template is quite zoomed out. If it's actually even going to work. I'm going to quickly pause the video and I'll be back when it comes back. Alright, so we're a few minutes past that, 5 or 6 now, and Civil 3D still has not recovered. So I'm just going to quit this. Quit Civil 3D and start again. So keeping items on proper sites is very, very, very important if you want to keep your drawings. I personally have lost many drawings due to not placing things on proper sites, and this was just before I knew better. Full-scale drawing corruption is completely possible. Losing line work, losing feature lines, and whatnot is also possible. Very rarely will you get lucky and have things actually work out for the better. So just to confirm I'm still in the template, and it loaded up. It did not. I'm going to open up our template here. So we saw what happens when we keep, actually I'm going to undo that. I'm going to make this 10 meters long and zoom extents. We found out what happened when we placed two feature lines on the same site, crossing each other at different elevations. Now, if both feature lines were at the exact same elevation and that was the tie-in point, say a low point, and everything sloped to that one spot, then yes, perfectly fine. There's no conflicting argument when the elevation is actually the same. So if we went from 3 to 2 to 1, 3 to 2 to 1, not a problem. So let's give that a try now. So I'm going to create feature lines from objects, and you can make a site when you are making your feature lines. So there's already site 1, I'll just leave it there. I'll leave these as red. We'll assign elevations for now. I'm just going to put them to elevation 3. So now we have two feature lines here again. And I'm going to elevation editor this. And you notice you can't actually change the point. So we can add in an elevation point. So I'm going to add in an elevation point where they meet. And I'm going to make that elevation 2. I'm going to do the exact same to this one here. Just add in a center elevation point, elevation 2. Now both our feature lines are 3, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3. So if we make a surface, name it Site 1, add both these feature lines to that Site 1 surface, and here we have a 3, 2, 3. Now, if I take this feature line and say I want the middle point, we'll go 4. So we're going to make it higher than the rest. Rebuild my surface. Now, it doesn't look like much has changed, but if we elevation editor this one here, that has taken the elevation from the feature line below it. So because they're on the same sites, they talk to each other. They both have this center node point added, so if I change one, it updates the other one, and vice versa. So if I change the one now here, and we'll do something crazy like 15, it has taken both feature lines and put them to 15, as you can see here. So that is 2 feature lines on one site. Now, say you didn't want either of these feature lines to intersect with each other, and they were 2 crossing feature lines, and you had to design it this way. So when we design a pond, for an example, I'm going to draw a quick rectangle. We're going to change the dimensions. I'm just going to make it 10 by 10. Now, we need 3 or 4 separate sites when we're designing a pond. We have to target multiple objects, and that'll be another video on how to actually go about designing a pond. This video is just on sites. So we're going to have a feature line, or sorry, a site for our pond floor. We're going to have a site for our pond berm. Now let me open up my properties window here. And let me change this to red so you can see it better. So we're going to have pond floor, we'll have pond berm, and in our design, we're going to have a sump in our pond. So we're going to need to have a minimum of 3 different sites. And I'm just going to quickly move this. Again, we'll design this in another video. And we're going to have to use these 3 separate sites to build one pond, and at the end we're going to join it all together. So creating multiple sites is definitely important. So I'm going to make some more feature lines here. We're just going to have a square box, and then we'll do another square box. So I'm going to have, these are 2 sites. So to just move this out of the way, we're going to create a feature line from this site. We're going to name this one Site 2. Site 2. We're going to make this one blue so it's easier to see. We're going to assign an elevation. We're just going to do 10 meters. Now I'm going to make a feature line of this one. I'm going to create a new site. I'm going to place this on Site 3. So these 2 will now be on separate sites. We're going to make this magenta. We're going to assign an elevation. We'll go 25. So if I create a surface now, we're going to name it Site 2. We're going to add this one feature line to the site. The surface, sorry. Now, because everything's the same elevation, nothing shows up. So I'm going to set this to rebuild automatic. And I'm going to go into elevation editor. So if I make this one corner 15, this corner 20, this one back to 15. So we have a surface that's now sloping. And as you notice in here, there's no additional points like we saw on the same feature line site. This is still a feature line. Sorry, properties. Or we can even tell up here, feature line. It is crossing our blue box here, but because they are on separate sites, they don't see each other. So we could create another surface under here that is completely separate, completely independent, does not rely on any other feature lines, and will not talk to this. So I'm going to quickly take this feature line and I'm going to move it to Site 2. So these two are now on the same site. They now talk to each other. So if I take this feature line and I go into Elevation Editor, we now have our extra points in here. What happens when I rebuild this surface? So this surface is now reading the elevations from that magenta feature line. So in designing Civil 3D objects, we have to build it in stages. So when I'm talking about a pond, we have to build the floor first. So we design we put one feature line for the floor. We grade it the way we want it. The second site will do our berm and we'll target the floor on the one side. We'll target existing ground on the outside. So that's a second site now. They're just targeting each other. They're in the general area, but they are not at all connected to each other. So if I change something on the floor, the grading of the berm will update, but none of the feature lines that they're crossing will interact with each other. And lastly, we'll have to design the sump third. So yes, there's a stage in which we design them, but definitely keep things on separate sites. It's when you start putting similar objects or two crossing objects on different sites, even though they're showing two different things. So if you have a road and a pond or a road and a ditch and they're crossing each other, separate them with sites. Because your road's going to get drugged down to the ditch elevation, your ditch is going to get drugged up to the road elevation, and that is when you're going to start crashing. That's when you're going to start corrupting drawings. That is when you're going to start losing feature lines, and things are going to go downhill pretty fast when you start doing putting objects on the same site with different elevations. So keep things separate. Again, if you try and put a piece of grading on an object that's on a different site than the one you're on, Civil 3D will let you know, so you can go and fix that. And again, as you saw, it was just a simple selection, right click, move to site, and I'm going to put this back to site 3. And now if I rebuild the surface, it's gone back to normal. So these two now are completely separate again. They're on different sites. So keep things separate, keep things consistent, keep things clean. This is the #1 way not to corrupt and lose drawings. Now, I should have said at the beginning of the video, but always back your work up. Create copies of files. Copy, paste, save as a new name before you start using grading tools, feature lines, sites, and whatnot. And again, I cannot stress heavily enough, name these descriptively. So if this is your pond bottom, name it pond bottom. And I'm actually in surfaces right now. And you'll be doing the exact same thing with this. Your sites, site 1, again, just name it what it is. Now, changing the name of a site is not such a big deal, but as you saw above, I changed the name of my surface. So I changed my surface to Pond Berm. When I select on it now, if I open up my Layers toolbox, this is on to fix, and this will be fixed in your first assignment. Site 1. Well, it's no longer called Site 1, it's called Pond Berm. So changing the names of surfaces afterwards is a little bit of work. You got to change it here. You have to go change your layer name. And so just name things descriptively. So it'll be C-surf-pond bottom. So a couple different places you have to change things. So set everything up from the get-go, and you'll be golden. And again, pay attention to your sites, pay attention to what you're designing. Do not combine two very separate objects in the same general area on the same site. And that is the video on sites. The next one I post will be on designing an intermediate type pond using sites, using grading objects, using feature lines, and attaching to our existing ground surface.